Well, good morning. It's certainly good to be here with you and to open up our Bibles and to study from the Word of God at this time. I ask that you would have a Bible out if it's not out already and be following along with me during this time. Certainly want to give a warm welcome to those that we have visiting with us. Really glad that you've chosen to be here. And Liz, I'm not gonna count you as a visitor. We're gonna count you as extended family in this instance. But it's certainly good to see you and others that are out with us. You know, if you're visiting here and you have any questions about anything that we say, anything that we do, don't hesitate to let us know, and we'll hopefully be able to get an answer to you. At the Bacchanal Buffet at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, it is claimed to be the largest and most expansive buffet in the world. At nearly $50 a person, you can have every one of your food dreams met. They offer more than 500 entrees at each breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They have nearly everything you could possibly imagine. And some have wondered, why do they need so many different options? Why do they have all this different types of food? And so they asked the manager that in an interview, and her response was this. She said, "We live in a world and a time where people want what they want, when they want it, and how they want it, at their disposal and on demand. We are here to serve those desires and to send them home satisfied." To some, that may sound like a dream come true. But when we peel back the layers of what she said, it exposes a deeper problem. That when gorging ourselves is something that we need in order to be satisfied, in order to be fulfilled, we've exposed a deeper problem than just the flesh. We've exposed a heart problem. It's the sin of overindulgence. It's the sin of gluttony. And I won't hesitate to admit that, hey, this is a difficult topic. And as a result, what we've done is we've overlooked this topic. We probably haven't talked about it. That for many of you, this may be the first lesson you've ever heard even preached on gluttony. Or worse, in my opinion, I think it's a sin that some of us think doesn't even apply to us. Typically what I do at other congregations that I do here at Kaysville, I print out the handouts, to be following along. And it's kind of a double-edged sword. I like that people follow along, but then it also gives away what I'm going to be talking about. And so when I was in Florida, I had someone come up to me and say, knowing that the topic was going to be about gluttony, they said, "Well, I'm not overweight, so that sin doesn't apply to me." I'm afraid that gluttony is one of those topics that none of us really admit. We don't really raise our hand and say, "I'm guilty of it." It's one of those sins that other people are guilty of. And here's a sobering warning for us as we're going to be talking about gluttony in this lesson. If you struggle with lust, you struggle with greed, anger, pride, and sins like these, you probably struggle with gluttony as well. And I hope to expand our horizon a little bit and give us a better biblical understanding of what gluttony is all about. But I want to be upfront with something as we begin, and before we jump too far into this lesson. Just because someone is overweight does not mean that they are sinning. Just because they are overweight does not mean they are sinning. And gluttony is not equated with being overweight. Biblically speaking, not at all. And while being a glutton can contribute to being overweight in some instances, it's not correct. It's not fair for us to look at someone's size and prejudge based on outward appearances that, well, because they're overweight, they're a glutton. Shame on us. That's unrighteous judgment. That's not the way that we view people around us. At least we shouldn't be. Gluttony is not a weight issue. In my study of this topic, I never found anywhere in Scripture where size is the criteria for if someone's a glutton or not. Rather, it's our attitudes toward God and the flesh that determines gluttony. And so I think that's an important place for us to begin, is understanding what gluttony is from a biblical perspective. What does the Bible reveal to us about the sin of gluttony? Well, the word gluttony, as we have it in our English language and how we use it today, actually comes from a Latin term. Someone that's a gluttier, meaning to gulp down. And originally the word was understood that it meant overindulgence, overconsumption in areas relating to food, drink, but also wealth, is how this word was originally and first used, especially in the Latin language. But I want you to notice the emphasis on the word overindulgence and overconsumption. And that's why drunkenness is similar to the word of gluttony. You might be thinking, well, why is that? Well, simply put, a drunkard is a liquid-based glutton. Literally, someone that drinks too much. And so when drunkenness is condemned, oftentimes gluttony goes hand in hand. And you'll probably see that with a lot of the verses that we'll look at this morning. But the Hebrew word for gluttony is halal. And it's a word that means, if you're filling out the right side of that handout, it talks about what are some different definitions given. Literally, at the core of this root word, what gluttony means is to shake. To shake. And you might be thinking, to shake? Do you got the right word? Yeah. Typically, it's used sometimes to describe some type of bush that's blowing in the wind, shaking from the wind. And what happens when you shake something? It becomes loose. And as a result, throughout the years, this word zalel describes someone that is loose in their behavior, someone that is morally loose, someone that has been shaken to the extreme in how they live their lives, a person that's worthless, a person that's a prodigal, lacking self-restraint. And so if we simply define gluttony as overeating, we've already missed the biblical use of the word. Similar words used in the Bible to describe gluttony would be debauchery or riotous. That's probably a better approach for us when we talk about the subject of gluttony and what exactly we're dealing with. But let's look at a few examples of this. Proverbs 23, verses 19 through 21. Listen to what this says about the glutton. Proverbs 23 and verse 19, it says, "Hear, my son, and be wise, and direct your heart in the way. Be not among drunkards or among gluttonous eaters of meat. For the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and slumber will clothe him with rags." And so I want you to notice from this verse, what is associated with the glutton and also the drunkard in this verse? What's associated with it? It's that they become poor and they become lazy. Those are two of the consequences that we see in this text, that the lifestyle of a glutton, it's linked with waste, it's linked with destruction. Other translations that you may be reading from may even use the word riotous, or those who just simply eat too much meat. And these verses aren't saying that we can't enjoy good food, that you can't enjoy a good meal, but they are speaking against excess that leads to a wasteful style of living. Other verses on this topic, Proverbs 28 and verse 7, and we're going to be coming back to the Proverbs a lot throughout this lesson. But Proverbs 28 and verse 7, it says, "The one who keeps the law is a son with understanding, but a companion of gluttons shames his father." Notice who shames his father in this verse. It's not the son who is a glutton. It's the son who's simply a companion of glutton. Just to be a companion of those who engage in this type of lifestyle. It's their attitude. It's the way they live. That brings shame upon the father. And what we see is that a glutton is someone whose indulgence becomes a distraction towards serving God. A distraction towards serving God. And that's a big deal. The New Testament, in particular, the Apostle Paul, spends a lot of time addressing Christians about how they use their bodies. Using your body in a God-fearing way. A God-glorifying way. But the glutton does the exact opposite. They destroy their body. They're reckless in how they live. But being glutton, being a glutton or being gluttonous, we're talking about an area that doesn't just revolve around food. Typically, that's how we associate the word gluttony, is with food. That's why I kind of played off that with the image of donuts for this PowerPoint. That's what we think about. Gluttony is with food, but it's far more reaching than just our physical appetite for food. In Deuteronomy chapter 21, I want you to see how this plays out here. Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 18 through 20. It says, "If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and though they discipline him, will not listen to them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city at the gate of the place where he lives, and they shall say to the elders of his city, 'This is our son. This our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard.'" And so the charge that's brought before the elders of the city on account of this rebellious son is that he's a drunk. He's a glutton. but also that he is rebellious, he is disobedient, he is stubborn. And in the context, you read verse 21, what's the consequence? Capital punishment is the crime in this instance. But Deuteronomy 21, as we read this verse, I want you to understand, this verse is not picturing a little child about 8 or 9 years old, that its parents tell him what to do, tell her what to do, and they say no, and they discipline, the child still acts stubbornly. That's not what we're depicting here. We're depicting someone, think about more of the ages like 18 to 24. You know, that the parents discipline over and over and over again. Someone that's grown up, we may call them a young man, but they act like a young child. They have not matured the way that they ought to. They are marked by their disobedience. Gluttony and drunkenness are simply symptoms of this rebellious and disobedient heart. And I hope that emphasizes that gluttony is so much more than food. That's what we're going to be talking about throughout this lesson. That I know it's common for gluttony to appear in the context of food, but there's many other masks that this sin is disguised as. Different areas that it affects us in our lives today. It's really anything of excess. That's an area where we can be guilty of gluttony. Do you remember the time that Jesus himself was accused of being a glutton? Really one of the only instances we have in the New Testament of this word. There is a mention of it being used in the book of Titus, talking about how the Cretans were all drunks and gluttons. But other than that, these are the only mentions of the word glutton or gluttony being used in the New Testament. And I'm going to read from Matthew 11, verse 19, where it says, "The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, 'Look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Yet wisdom is justified by her deeds.'" Have you ever wondered why they looked at Jesus and accused him of being a glutton and a drunkard? Was Jesus just reckless in how he carried himself at parties? And, we know he went to a wedding and turned the water to wine. People love to go to that passage. I want you to understand the context of this verse and what it's referencing, the association of gluttony, the association of drunkards. It's those that are associated with sinners, those that are associated with tax collectors. By Christ's life and who he spent time with, they thought that he, in association, was also morally loose, that he also was riotous and excessive. This man rubbed elbows with the wrong people. That's what people assumed about Jesus. Look at who he spends time with. He must act the same way. And let me be clear. Obviously, Christ was no glutton, was no drunkard. Not at all. In the same way that in the verses before that they accused John the Baptist of having demons. That was a false accusation as well. The problem was not with Jesus or John, but it was with the critics. But hopefully that gives us a better understanding of what gluttony is all about. What does this word mean? How is it used in Scripture? But I want us to clearly identify what exactly makes gluttony so sinful. What makes it so wrong? Obviously, we've been talking a lot about the idea of excess, and we'll come back to that. But at the core of gluttony, what we're talking about and what makes it so sinful, it's a lack of self-control. It is a lack of self-restraint. If you're wanting to put down maybe another definition, put it in your own words, this idea of an unrestrained appetite. Unrestrained appetite. In self-control, let me be clear, this isn't just a good idea. It's not a noble character trait if you're able to exercise it. No. This is something we are called and commanded to have as children of God, to be a people that can control our appetites, control our bodies. You think about how frequently the idea of self-control is brought out, that it is a fruit of the Spirit. In 2 Peter 1, it's a Christian grace, a Christian virtue that we supplement our faith with, that we're supposed to be growing in. In Acts 24 and verse 25, Paul reasoned with Felix about 3 things, and one of those was self-control. And in 2 Timothy 1 and verse 7, we're reminded that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power and love and self-control. One of the definitions of self-control that I love is someone that is able to get a grip or harness their emotions, harness their desires. And would that be a summary of how you live your life? Do you have a grip on your desires, your impulses, your appetite? The glutton doesn't. They're simply overpowered by their desire for more. told you we'd go back to the book of Proverbs, and we're still going to come back. But in Proverbs 25, 27, and 28, listen to what it says here. It says, "It is not good to eat much honey, nor is it glorious to seek one's own glory. A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls." When we don't have self-control, when we can't exercise the proper self-restraint, we become like a city that is left defenseless. We become ran over by our desires, by our temptations, and thus sin. But the application of this verse goes well beyond just self-control and eating food or eating sweets. It pictures having no control in any area of life. And when that happens, we become characterized as a people of gluttony. That our desires rule over us in every area of our life. And that's not the way that a child of God should be living. You think about what, and I know we're looking at a lot of scriptures here rather quickly, but in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, listen to what this says about when we are controlled by our urges, controlled by our desires. And in this passage, we're not talking about the appetites for food. We're talking about a sexual appetite. In 1 Corinthians 6, verses 12 through 13, Paul makes some quotes from the people. "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. Food is meant for the stomach, and the stomach for food. And God will destroy both one and the other. The body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body." This context is part of a conversation that began in the previous chapter, where Paul has to rebuke sexual immorality that was condoned and even participated in by some at Corinth. But the principle laid out in these verses ties in so nicely with self-control, especially as it relates to gluttony. That our bodies are not meant for purely pleasure and just satisfying any urges, any desires that we have. I know this probably starts to get into another lesson on sexual issues, but we are living in the middle of a sexual revolution in this country, where promiscuity is being promoted in so many areas with this intent behind it that your body, if it feels good, do it. That's your right. You're entitled to it. And yet for the child of God, it must not be so. That's not our purpose. Paul refused to let his body be dominated by any type of desire, sinful or not. But our physical appetites, yes, even our sexual appetites, those must be controlled. And I think this is one of the hardest parts about self-control, is that it's expected in every area of life. That we must be a temperate people in how many hours we work when it comes to our job, how much we sleep, how much we eat, how much entertainment we take in. Are we a person of control in those areas of our life? Another reason that makes gluttony so sinful as well, it's the idea of excess, the idea of overindulging in desires. And I hope we understand, hey, there's a difference between indulging and overindulging. One is excess and the other is not. And obviously, hear me out, please. I'm not saying if something's sinful, as long as you're not going into it with excess, it's okay. No. So we continue in sin that grace may abound? Certainly not, by no means. God forbid. But we're talking about areas that are not sinful in and of themselves. That too much of a good thing can become sinful. Proverbs 25 and verse 16 is a great working example, working illustration of gluttony described. Proverbs 25 and verse 16, a really simple passage, but I think it will help to illustrate this point. Solomon writes this: "If you have found honey, eat only enough for you, lest you have your fill of it and vomit it." Have enough. That's kind of a good baseline for us to understand. The idea of one who's a glutton, they overindulge. They eat to the point where the body cannot handle what they've done, and as a result, they vomit things out. And so the solution in this text is say, eat only enough. Don't go to that point of excess. You know, there was a Roman emperor in the year 69 AD named Vitellius. Only reigned for about 8 months. And when you look at his lifestyle, it becomes clear why he only reigned 8 months. He was nicknamed by the people Partinium. Partinium, which in Greek means this: pile of dishes. That was his nickname, the pile of dishes. How would you like that? Suetonius, the historian, wrote about this man and said that he would take drugs to induce vomiting so that he could make more room to keep eating. That his stomach was full, but his appetite was not. And so he would have to take drugs to keep eating more. And the predecessor of Vitellius, Galba, wrote this about him, that he thought of nothing but eating, and that he described him as having, quote, a bottomless gullet. That's how Vitellius is remembered in history. And what that shows us for us, that's a great example of overindulgence, to the point of excess. And we may hear examples like that and think, I don't eat that way, I don't go and eat so much that I cause myself to be sick. But what are other areas of our life where maybe this happens, where we fill ourselves to the point of excess, that we have what we need, we have enough, but we just keep going in and in and in for more and more? Can you think of any areas where that might happen? Ezekiel 16 talks about one way that may happen in reference to our money, in reference to our finances. In Ezekiel 16, verses 49 through 50, Ezekiel's going to use the people of Sodom and Gomorrah to make a parallel, but also a condemnation of the people of Israel. And listen to what he says about the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. Ezekiel 16:49, behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. They were haughty and did an abomination before me, so I removed them when I saw it. These verses describe just some of the many sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. And what we see included in this list would be that of gluttony. The idea that they had excess of food. And what did they do? What did they do with that excess? They kept it all for themselves. They didn't help anybody else. They didn't give aid to their neighbor, to their brother. And that's one of the problems with overindulging in our desires and what we want. We focus so much about me and making sure my desires are being met. And even when they are met, what do? We go to the point of excess. And that's what makes it so wrong, what makes it so sinful. Israel should have learned from Sodom and shared what they had. But instead, they too were gluttonous for more and ignored those who were in need. And I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from that. That we in this country today, that we can develop a mindset like Sodom and like Israel, so caught up with overindulging and being so absorbed with excess that we forget about others, and ultimately we start to forget about God. American greed has a way of drowning out concern for other people, but that's not how the Christian conducts themselves. There's nothing holy or righteous that comes from an overindulgence lifestyle. But another way that gluttony is sinful is its links to idolatry. That it makes our stomach an idol. Be turning over to Philippians 3, where that passage was read for the scripture reading by Al. But we'll read that verse in a second. Because I came across this study that I thought was fake at first, but it was real. It was by Pew Research. They did a study and they found that 71% of religious people in America, very broad definition, religious people in America, 71% claim that idolatry does not exist today. Idolatry doesn't exist. And that's probably operating off the assumption that idolatry is talking about this little wooden or metal object that people bow down and worship. Yeah, that probably doesn't exist in this country. Probably not. But idolatry exists in a lot of other ways. Notice what Philippians 3 says about that. For many of whom I have often told you and now tell you even with tears, walk as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their end is destruction, their God is their belly, and they glory in their shame with minds set on earthly things. We're not going to read it, but the same idea is found in Romans chapter 16, verses 17 and 18. That gluttony causes the main focus to be about me, my desires, my wants. That their God is their belly. And that is an expression that just encapsulates the person that is worldly in their focus and in their mindset and their pursuits. They've exalted their stomach. They've exalted their appetite above God. And again, in that passage, I don't even think when it says that their God is their belly, that it's even talking about their appetite for physical food. And that passage is probably talking about matters of the flesh, maybe circumcision, maybe that of a paycheck. I think that's definitely being talked about in Romans 16. That those are the appetites that seem to take the place of God. And so if your God is your belly, that means you won't be able to see anything beyond eternity. And that's a scary place to look, a scary place to be. That if something else has captured our hearts, it's taken the place of God, that's idolatry. And certainly that can happen when we're talking about the sin of gluttony. And as we close this morning, I want to present just several areas that gluttony can occur. I was going over the PowerPoint, having Haley proof check it with me last night, and she noticed something wasn't on this list, that I don't have food on it. And I said, well, I'll clarify it. Areas other than food that gluttony can occur. I think that one's a given. And certainly there are probably some of us here that we struggle with that when it comes to the area of food. What are some other areas that gluttony can occur? And this list is not all-inclusive, but just several to think about. What about sports? You could put in hobbies with this as well. Did you know that during the first several weeks of the football season, the average American will spend 7 hours on Sunday watching football? 7 hours. And that doesn't even include Saturdays. And then you got Monday night football now, Thursday night football, college games now on Friday night, high school games on Friday. I mean, if you wanted, there's probably a game on every night of the week. You tie sports in then with gambling addictions, and boy, we have an epidemic on our hands going on. The amount of Americans that are struggling with gambling addiction as it ties in with sports, that's scary and sobering to think about. But do we have a gluttonous appetite when it comes to our hobbies? The time that we spend watching sports? Again, where does the line of excess come in? Is 7 hours too much to sit down and watch TV in one day? So questions you're going to have to start asking yourself. What about TV, television, the shows we watch? The different streaming platforms. You know, a decade or two ago, no one knew the phrase binge watching. That wasn't even a thing. We knew of binge drinking, but not binge watching. And now it's known and even advertised. It's promoted. Netflix, has the options for binge-worthy TV shows. What are the best TV shows that are just built for binging, just watching continuous episode after episode after episode, and hours of your life dwindle away? Average American watches roughly 5 hours of TV each day, and that includes TV streaming options like Netflix and Hulu. And then what do? We watch 5 hours of TV on each day, roughly, and then we complain that we don't have enough time. It's typically what we do. But has our consumption for digital entertainment reached the point of excess? In many ways, I think it definitely has in this country. What about our phones? Now, so many times we turn to the screen instead of turning to prayer. We pause to read Facebook instead of pausing to read Scripture. And at the rate our society is going, millennials, broad term, millennials will grow up by the end of their life averaging 6 years of their life on social media. 6 years of their life. I had to put that in perspective for me of what that would look like. Russell is about 11 weeks old. Couldn't imagine him being in a room alone by himself for 6 years looking at a phone. And that's what those millennials and younger, that number is only trending up. How many, not just minutes, not how many hours, how many years of their life they're spending looking at a phone. And yet 71% of Americans, religious Americans, say that idolatry doesn't exist today. I'm not buying that. It's sad that we fill our lives with comfort food, comfort TV, comfort screens in order to fill our time, yet we grow distant from God and His Word. Social media seems to be teaching more and more of our society than we probably care to admit. But is that happening amongst us? Are we turning to social media for our fix, for our fills, for our satisfaction in life? If that's the case, what does that reveal about the intents of our heart? Have we become estranged from God and His Word because of our gluttonous appetite for screen time, for having a phone in our hands? Another area that this happens is with money, with finances. Part of the very origin of the word of gluttony ties back to food, drink, and wealth. And certainly, I think we know how that happens today. A verse that's not on the handout or the PowerPoint, Matthew 23 and verse 25, one of the rebukes, one of the woes of the Pharisees. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. self-indulgence. Gets across the idea of gluttony, self-indulgence. That's what it's all about. But greed is very closely related to the word gluttony. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that next week. But we can certainly view finances and income with a gluttonous attitude. A craving for more and more that never stops. That's greed, but that's also gluttony. And here's a challenging place for some of us that we need to start. Look at your spending reports. Look at your credit card report. What is your spending habits? What does that reveal, not just about your bank account, but what does that reveal about your focus, your pursuits, your intent? What does that reveal about our heart? You know, you put together everything we've been discussing this morning about gluttony, and what do we see? We've been talking not just about gluttony. We've talked a lot about different areas such as greed, such as excess, such as laziness, loose morality, no self-control, selfishness, sexual immorality, poor personal finance. Gluttony is a sin that affects a lot of other areas of our life other than just what we eat and what we consume. And this is the challenge we face. We are living in a land of plenty, a land of excess. From Olive Garden's never-ending pasta bowls to buffets on every corner, there's so many places that we can go get our fill to the point of excess, to the point of gluttony. And we need to examine ourselves and see if we are gluttonous in our lives, because gluttony, it has no place in the life of a child of God, and we need to rid this sin from our hearts. I don't typically do too many two-part lessons, but I'm going to make an exception here with gluttony. I want to come back and revisit this topic more next week, where we dig into some practical ways for how we can live a life of self-control in an age of excess, in a land of plenty. What are some practical ways that we can counteract maybe the tendencies that we have to develop a gluttonous heart in this country and in our culture? And so I look forward to talking with you more about that next week. But oftentimes gluttony is a search for fulfillment. A search to be filled, a search to be satisfied. And that can't happen without Christ. Colossians 2:9-10 tells us that we have been filled in Christ. That we have been made complete in Christ, as some translations say. And that's a description of those who have been buried with Him in baptism. And if you're here this morning and you feel like there's something missing in your life, could that be perhaps because you don't know the Lord? Because you haven't been baptized, that you haven't begun your walk with Him? And if so, if you're here this morning and you're subject to heaven's invitation in any way, we'd invite you to respond to it now as we stand and sing the song, Selected.